Welcome to the Master Reset Podcast, where we take you from where you are to where you want to be. A key word that the Lord has highlighted in recent times is His expectation of unconditional obedience from His sons. In other words, our obedience to God is not subject to any condition. And an example of a condition is when we say, I only obey God when I understand why He wants me to do it and how He wants me to do it. We don't obey God because we understand why He gave us His instructions. We obey God because it is Him who is instructing us or leading us. Understanding comes as a result of obedience. Understanding is not a prerequisite for obedience. Now, Luke 5 gives the account of Peter and his colleagues fishing all night without catching a single fish. The next day, while they were cleaning their nets, Jesus came and He used Peter's boat, from which He addressed a crowd of people. And I'm going to read from Luke chapter 5 from verse 4 to 6. And it says this: He said to Simon, "Put out into deep water and let down the nets for a catch." Simon answered, "Master, we've worked hard all night and haven't caught anything. But because you say so, I will let down the nets." Now in those days, fishermen caught fish at night and not during the day, because during the day the fish could see the nets and swim around it. So the instruction that Jesus gave Peter didn't make sense to him or any other fisherman. Peter obeyed Jesus because it was Jesus instructing him. He said, "Master, we have worked hard all night and haven't caught anything." And this is the key. "But because you say so, I will let down the nets." He was saying, my obedience to you, Jesus, is because of the fact that you told me to do this. Not because I think the instruction makes sense, because it doesn't make sense. Now, the legitimacy of a thought or an instruction is dependent on the legitimacy of the source of those thoughts and instructions. We therefore need discernment to determine whether or not God is the source of a thought or an instruction. Once we've determined that the Lord is the source, then there's only one legitimate response. And that response is, "Yes, Lord." For Peter, it was easy to determine the source of the instruction that he received because Jesus was literally in front of him in the flesh. However, Abraham didn't have that luxury. Abraham heard and responded in obedience to the voice of the Lord. Now let's look at two events in Abraham's life that illustrates the fleshing out of the principle of first obedience and then understanding. When God called Abraham, God said, "Go from your country, your people, and your father's household to the land that I will show you." God expected Abraham to make a life-altering decision to leave his family and his country without explaining where He was taking him. But God gave Abraham just enough info for him to move from where he was. Abraham didn't know where he was going, but he only knew where he couldn't stay. Abraham didn't have all the details. He didn't have this mindset of, Lord, I want to know a step-by-step process about where you are taking me and how we're going to get there before I take one step of obedience. No. That didn't happen. God just told him, get out of your country, immigrate. He didn't know where he was immigrating to. God just told him, get out of your country, get out of your father's house and go to the land that I will show you. So as he obeyed God, God would progressively reveal where He was leading him. And that was the first event. That was the calling of Abram, where Abram epitomized this principle of first obeying and then understanding. The second event of Abram's life that I'll be focusing on took place in Genesis 22. This was his greatest test. Now, let's read from Genesis chapter 22 from verse 1 to 3. Sometime later, God tested Abraham. He said to him, "Abraham." "Here I am," he replied. Then God said, "Take your son, your only son, whom you love, Isaac, and go to the region of Moriah. Sacrifice him there as a burnt offering on a mountain I will show you." Early the next morning, Abram got up and loaded his donkey. He took with him 2 of his servants and his son Isaac. Now, this event has always been perplexing to me. Not only did God's instruction to Abram not make sense, What's even more baffling to me was Abram's response to God. Abraham didn't even question the validity of what he was hearing. He just responded in obedience. If I was in Abram's shoes, I would instinctively say, "Get behind me, Satan," if I heard a voice that said I must sacrifice my son Caleb. At best, I would take some time to prayerfully meditate on what I was hearing to determine whether the source of what I'm hearing was God or not. Abraham, on the other hand, responded immediately to God's instructions, despite the seemingly craziness of God's instruction. He undoubtedly knew that it was God that was speaking to him. In hindsight, we know it was only a test, and God never intended that Abraham sacrifice Isaac. Abraham lived under the lordship of God. Once he knew that it was God leading him, he said, "Yes, Lord," because that is the only appropriate response from God's sons to him, which is, "Yes, Lord." Because if we don't say yes, if we say "No, Lord," then that means he is not Lord. Are you with me? "Yes, Lord" is the only legitimate response that he gave once he knew it was God speaking to him, and then he just obeyed. What an amazing example Abram was. After Abram obeyed him, God revealed himself to him as Jehovah Jireh. This revelation and understanding of God's nature was revealed to him because he obeyed God. It was the result of his obedience. This understanding and this revelation was the result of his obedience, not the prerequisite of his obedience. So, to just summarize, it's always obedience first and understanding second. We therefore need discernment to determine whether or not God is the source of a thought or an instruction. Once we've determined that the Lord is the source, then there's only one legitimate response, and that response is, "Yes, Lord."